Yeah, thanks for coming this early in the morning, and our panel is going to jump in right away and address the market ultimately. And we have here people who have been pioneering and very successful at doing that. To my right, in the order in which they will be speaking, John F. Simon Jr. and Lynn Hirschman, whose work has been widely collected in museums such as the Guggenheim, MoMA, and the Whitney. Magda Savon, who is running Postmasters Gallery and again has been pioneering in representing this type of art early on. And Lev Manovich in a double role as a theorist who has thought a lot about software art and also an artist whose work has been exhibited. So we're going to draw on all of their expertise to get to the core issues here. As to the format, each of them will just briefly, for 5 to 7 minutes, introduce their work. We're then going to have a conversation amongst each other, getting to some of the issues, and then we'll have some time for Q&A with you. I will give you a heads up so you can already move down the aisle to the microphones, and we're not wasting time in handing around mics and lining you up. So first of all, from virtual to real, don't take that title too seriously, because what we do not want to suggest here is that only once you make work physical or bring it into a collection, it becomes real. The virtual is very real in and of itself. So there have been numerous challenges of that new media art has posed for institutions and the art market. I'm just throwing that out. First of all, I think its aesthetics are still not fully understood or difficult to understand for many people. Immateriality is a huge, huge issue here, not necessarily dealing with physical objects, which raises questions of preservation. And also the reception by audiences can be very shaky. So when it comes to those characteristics, I'm not going to talk about them in detail. The time-based nature is something that this art shares with video and film and other forms, but the fact that it is algorithmic, it can be interactive, automated, real-time, these are not necessarily the art objects that enter museum collections. Of course, there's a history in performance art and live art forms, but there still are issues. Myself working at a museum, I know that one of the obstacles, very simply, is the collection management systems of museums, which do not have the vocabulary to collect the art. So they enter the system, but there's no label for each and every characteristic of the work. So you also have to revise those systems. Artists have come up with various ways of making their work sellable. What you're looking at is the art website sales contract that is actually online by Raphael Rosendahl, who creates his web works, each of them under a separate domain. So what you're buying as a collector is actually the domain name of which you assume ownership along with the work, although the work remains public. What you're looking at here is Raphael Lozano Hammer's Reporters with Borders. So this work has been exhibited as a projection, large scale, in exhibitions, and then also has become a sellable object in his Shadowbox series. Again, big caveat here, we do not want to encourage here that, oh, just turn it into a nice little object. Of course, in that process, you might destroy the work itself. So a big question is also the aesthetics of the work and what it needs and how it can be successfully translated. And preservation, yet another issue. There are many, many initiatives working on this. 4 of the main approaches are storage, migration, emulation, and reinterpretation. And I think the artists on the panel here have actually also found their own ways of addressing these issues, and perhaps they can talk a little bit more about that. So without further ado, I actually want to hand it over to John Simon. And we're passing the computer back and forth here.
Thank you. Oops. There it is. Okay. I also want to thank Isabel and the LISA conference for inviting me and putting me on such an illustrious panel. But I revere everyone up here, and I've known their work for a long time. So I think it's very lucky to have the group. And also it's very lucky to have this community because, you know, a group drawn around software and art when I began was much more unusual. I won't address content of my work as much as I want to just focus very briefly on the market, because the panel is really about putting work into collections. And say around 94, you couldn't write a piece of software that would run in a browser. The browser was basically text and picture display. And so at the very first moment that you could write a piece of software in the browser was brought out by Sun Microsystems. I wrote this little program called Every Icon. And it was just, the most amazing thing was that it would actually execute the code in the browser. And I thought, well, this is my fortune made, because of course I could sell this now as a piece of artwork, and everyone could run it, and it could run live. We sold a few, but we didn't sell that many. Although it got seen by a lot of people, and it's still running, still runs today. And this was about in '96, and I was having shows with Sandra Gehring. And we showed Every Icon, you know, and it was $20 for the applet. You could buy the applet for $20 and have it emailed to you, and you could unpack it. There was no app store. I think in those, you know, the app store is such an amazing place, and it's such a great opportunity. That's what 20 years ago we were looking for, something like the app store for distribution, and mostly money collection, because it was also very hard in the early days to even try to get money from online somehow, get a credit card account. So the transition that I made around 98 or 99 is the one you see. On the left, you see the old browser window and Every Icon running. And on the right, I've taken an old G3 Wall Street laptop, completely uncased it. I built a plastic housing. I sort of screwed the screen there, screwed the laptop to the back, and it's running exactly the same piece of software. And that was really what the transition was for me, was that I had to see the difference and understand the difference between the concept of the software and the physicality. And if I've had any success in the commercial art galleries, it's because the concept could be translated from this completely virtual context to some kind of physicality. And I don't have a lot of ideas why that's true. I have some ideas why that's true. One, I think, is that people who buy things like to have some physical object and they could maybe resell. But I think it's deeper than that. I think like there's something about the edge of the screen, the silver on the edge of the screen, and maybe the way it tarnishes the little wires that come out, or the edge of the plastic. Something about the physical material that you use to encase the screen that is also part of the experience of looking at art. So when you look at a sculpture, when you look at a painting, you don't just get the content of the piece. You do get the content of the piece, but you also get like where it is in the room and how it's lit and what the surface texture is and the history of the piece. And by taking it from the browser into this object, accidentally really, but just in a kind of a desperate move to try to make something to sell, it sort of opens up those doors. So how do I go to the next one? Okay, there we go. So then I spent the next maybe 5 or 6 years making a whole series of software artworks, which were pretty much the same trick, taking the laptop, flipping it around, putting it on a housing. And we did, really well. Of course, this was going through a time when technology art was very popular and also still new. It's still hard to imagine that even in the early 2000s, the flat screens and LCD screens were not so prevalent. And so just to see a flat screen at that time was something. So anyway, there's a whole series, and I went through a lot of iterations of writing. I used software as a type of creative writing, and I wrote about the city. I wrote about emergent behavior. I wrote about automata. I wrote about A-Life. I wrote about a lot of different subjects, and they were played out as these kind of ever-changing, never-repeating software artworks that were on screens. And they've been quite around. Okay. So anyway, sometime in the mid-2000s, the technology, of course, moved again, and flat screens became more common, and software art was this growing like crazy, and processing was around. So I started to build more elaborate cabinetry. So this is a piece that's about 6 feet by 4 feet. There's laser cut plexi, there's wire, and in the center is a kind of a dome with a screen behind it. So, and I really wanted to try to find out if I could do the textural thing bigger than the screen, and if I could make the textural thing so much more elaborate than the screen that they became in some ways equated. Because when you put a piece up with a screen, the tendency is just to look at the screen. And so could you somehow make the screen an integral part of the piece without making it be the whole piece? So I worked that way a little bit. And then this is another one where I started to use CNC to cut the yellow shapes that surround the piece. And then I used mirrors inside because I wanted to change the texture, the surface texture of the screen. So I started to try to work with the screen and the software as elements of a larger painting, elements of a sculpture. And then this is later, this is from 2010, so this is CNC work, but strictly CNC. So then I got really just into the surface texture, and I was using a laser cutter to cut the Formica and the CNC to route the depth. So it's kind of a dimensional piece. And that's another one from that show in 2010. And then this is what I'm sort of doing now. This is from over the summer. So I use HDU, which is high-density urethane. It's a sign-making material, and I use a hand sketch, and then Adobe Illustrator, and then Rhino, and then I go out to the CNC from Rhino, and so it carves a dimensional piece, and then I use hand finishing techniques to bring out that textural idea. And so you get a lot of digital and you get a lot of hand at the same time, and it becomes really much richer. It becomes very rich at that point. This is another one. So you can see from the side how layered it can be. So that's my introduction. Anyway, thank you a lot.
Thank you very much, John. And
I think that the real is a virtual. I think this is really inverted because to me it's always been about that edge, and I also think that you don't have to do work to fit into a collection, that the collection has to eventually find what you're doing. So the trick really is to take care of yourself and your health so that you could live the 40 years or 30 years that it takes for people to understand what it is you're doing. So I'm going to show you a few things that everybody, when I made them, said were completely uncollectible, completely unsellable. And I always believed that. And then all of a sudden there's some magic that happened and allowed me to be able to place these in collections and to be able to do more work. I mean, these are pieces from the early 60s that had sound and breathing, that had sensors that talked to people. And then actually the self-portrait was in a museum, and they closed down the show because they said media didn't belong in a museum and it wasn't art. So that it has that distinction. It was sold this year. Since 1963. These, again, are ephemeral works that took place in hotel rooms after my work was kicked out of a museum. This work, again, was kind of an archive of a person that lived for 10 years that didn't exist. She was virtual. I mean, her life became an archive of discards. And there you see her, and on the left you see it being this piece that everybody thought I was schizophrenic to make has been reperformed last week at MoMA. By a group from Paris. I just passed the one that the Tate now also owns this. This is a piece that I did very early on, which was an interactive piece that allowed you to make choices about the protagonist's direction and life, where she could either stay where she was, move to Los Angeles, or commit suicide. This one, again, had a little bit of a problem in its existence, not so much because of the software involved, but because every time I showed it, somebody broke it. At the Tate Liverpool, they broke it in half. At the ZKM, they broke it. But also, I couldn't export or deport it. It got caught in customs one time for almost 6 months, even though I had a State Department pass. And when you think about all the weapons that go back and forth, the thing that they picked on was an artwork that took a lot of doing to get out. So, this is a telerobotic doll that actually is a surveillance system because the webcam's in their eyes, where you could turn her head, the doll's head, if you're not there, and she could see what's going on wherever you place her. This one deals with the stock market, where the character inside has 13 different behavior models that are based by the actual real stock market that's happening. So if the market goes up, she goes shopping. If it goes down, she starts drinking and so forth. This one, I took 18 programmers and about six years to make. It's an artificial intelligence piece that just was shown this year at the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art. And this is a piece that you can actually talk to agentruby.net. And the thing about this piece is it's live, and it brings up all these different questions. I mean, these are some of the conversations that she's been having. So she's been talking now for 13 years. And that's collected like hundreds of thousands of conversations around the world. So what happened this year was we made 10 books out of some of the conversations per year. So you saw what people were thinking about sexuality and economics and feminism over the past decade in different locations, and it really became a mirror of culture. But you can't really preserve this work, because when you preserve it, you kill it. Because it's a living architecture, and so it has to continue and constantly create challenges for its existence. That's one of the books. This is the daughter of Agent Ruby, and this one actually has a voice and can recognize people that come up to her and actually can learn. This one isn't collected yet, but somebody's interested. It's a baby that swims in water, and the location that she's swimming in reflects in color coding the toxicity of the particular location. I don't know why that's there, but this is a new piece that has to do with genetics, and it's a staging. It's an actual genetics lab. And this is, these are some slides from the prototype of this. And again, a lot of these works are really about archiving. And it occurred to me that the DNA actually is our archive of all of life. It really records all of our scars and our memories and the forms that we've taken place, and it's kind of like the art world. Things. People come to it eventually, when they evolve to that point. This piece itself is being converted into DNA. All of the material that made this piece, the video, the drawings, are all going to become DNA this month. And then with a little DNA reader, the piece will be projected in a DNA form. Nobody's collected that one yet either. but I'll wait 30 years, which is what it takes. I mean, Lorna took 25 years to be shown. Roberta took 42 years. So.
Thank you very much.
Our gallery is currently in its fourth rendition in Tribeca. We started in 1984. And first of all, it's run by myself and Tomasz Banowicz, who is to a large degree responsible for our media discoveries and programs around it. Our kind of motivation and mantra for the gallery is to really show the work that is reflective and represents our time. And in that way, I would say the gallery is completely media neutral. So we do show all media. We show work that is software-based, and we show work that is oil-based. So it's really cross-cutting through everything, and it's more about how it relates to the moment in which it is created. The image that you see is the first show that we did in 1996 called Can You Digit? And it was one of those early shows where we actually brought in the screen-based work into a physical space of a commercial gallery and treated it in the exact way how you would treat any other artwork, which meant present it on separate screens. There was about 20 pieces there, all different experimentations with be it software work, be it games, be it bulletin board-based theater pieces, or screensavers. I mean, you name it. It really was kind of a little capsule of a survey. At that point, I thought we will just break the fourth wall and sell it like nothing. And 16 years later or whatever, it still is a big challenge, but we should see this challenge as something that reflects maybe 3,000 years of history of very conservative, traditional object making and object collecting. But that was the idea for us to bring this work into the context of other media and kind of work ourselves silly in a process of almost stripping the idea of it being media art and just trying to call it art. I recently read somewhere, a friend of mine, Mark Tribe, the founder of Rhizome, said that, a long time ago people were saying clock and then digital, they were referring to digital clocks, and right now it's just a clock. So the hope on our end is that the media art will become the same, just art and seen in exactly the same way. I think one example I wanted to bring here of this translation from virtual into more kind of real and collectible would be an example of an artist like Wolfgang Stelle. And this is probably one of the most known works of his. It's called 2001, and it was a live transmission from the cameras that were focused on the World Trade Center, and that work was transmitting to the gallery live from the 6th of September until the 21st and until the 6th of October, and quite obviously in the moment of the transmissions were going on all the time, and on September 11th the material that came in was this incredible record of an World Trade Center attack and ultimate collapse, and it was archived and it was documented. And this is the piece that we never really had an idea what to do with as an object for sale, because it just seemed a little bigger than placing it somewhere. At the time, Roberta Smith wrote about this show and this moment in that show that this is a piece in which a landscape painting became a history painting. So a few years later, Wolfgang, kind of attempting tranquility and peace, started making similar works that were off landscape, more related to Hudson Valley landscapes, and he created those transmissions and archived them as a one-day capsule that was running by custom-made software that was showing it back on the screen in real time. So it became this kind of one-day record, a window, if you please, that represented this single day in very minuscule changes. The images, which were stills, very high-res stills changing every 6 seconds. So in the course of 24 hours, you went through the day, but these momentary shifts were very, very minimal, and here and there you saw a bird. That is the work that, never became a physical object, but it nevertheless became kind of a capsule, a canned object that became more available for acquisition. And And we sold a number of them as very unique pieces of this particular day. And one of the institutions that acquired this piece, among others, is the Met. And I would like to actually point out to the department. This was conducted as an acquisition by photography department at the Met, obviously a huge encyclopedic museum. And their idea of going after the works that were not photographic was this kind of lineage that, that came with photography as being the first point of image making in a mechanical form. And, you know, so then photography leads to the video and leads to the work that is software-driven computer work. And aside from Wolfgang, of which they have now in the collection 2 different days, and of course, in that context, you can refer it to Hudson Valley painters and this kind of magnificent, huge landscapes of 19th century. They have this work. They also collected the works of artists of ours, Jennifer and Kevin McCoy, that was this database of all shots from the TV series Starsky and Hutch. And I know that it was a very difficult acquisition for Philippe de Montebello, the director of the museum at that time, who just could not process the idea of getting a CD with horrors, a TV show on it. So, then they also bought Spielberg's List, which was a 2-channel video of Omer Fast, a number of other pieces from many different sources. So this for me functions as a great example of institution that actually plunges into these new territories. And
we're actually out of time, but perhaps we can zip through the next ones and we talk about it in
oh,
the
okay.
Q&A.
Yeah, this is the work of Eva and Franco Mattes, created in virtual space of Second Life. They just grabbed photo shots of people's made avatars and made them into this series similar to the Warhol of 13 Most Beautiful People. And this is a piece of Raphael Rosendahl. It's a 3D lenticular print that has just recently, we collaborated with Philips with their first digital art auction, and we offered this work there along, actually, with his websites. Both of them were sold to collectors. So, and this is kind of a next generation of painting that is presented as a virtual screen, lenticular screen, and it also is it's algorithm that makes this painting. So it's a very different kind of brush. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. And
so I would like to talk about. Is that on? No.
Should be.
Yeah. Is that on? Okay. I would like to talk about a couple of interesting kind of ways in which software art both challenges and expands our 20th century idea of art and artistic mediums. And these ideas are developed in much more detail in my new book, Software Takes Command. So if you look at the cover of the book, what it is a close-up of one of many visualizations of digital media we created in my lab. So this particular visualization shows 62.5 hours of gameplay. So it's a single person, playing a popular Japanese game, Kingdom Hearts, from beginning to end. It's a single-player game. It took him 27 sessions over 20 days, and a total of 62.5 hours to play it. And we recorded, his gameplay and video, capturing it from a screen, and then, took this humongous video and sampled it. So each single frame is sampled every 3 seconds, right? And what you see is this kind of scale of a digital artwork, which is 62 hours, right? Condensed or summarized as a single still image. Now, when you think about a video game, let's say, okay, what is a video game? I want to collect a video game. So you can do something like this, right? So that's a record, a representation video game. But if you play it, or you interact with other kinds of digital interactive artworks, I'd like to suggest that the actual content of such a work is infinite, right? So if you really want to think about big data and what big data is, maybe big data is not 14 billion web pages, but the big data is a single video game. Because every time a different person or you will play this game, right, you can navigate through the space in different ways. You can go here and there, and various non-human characters are going to come out at you and shoot at you, right, directed by algorithm. And every time it's going to be a little bit different. So how would I actually represent, right, and collect this artwork, right? In theory, I can record, this gameplay experiences of millions of people, and nobody has done it. But I think hypothetically or conceptually, you can say it's actually infinite amount of data, right? So I think that's very, very interesting, right? It's a single work, right? You can put it, on a USB stick, but it's actually completely infinite. Nobody can even calculate how big it is. So that's one interesting challenge, which has to do with variability and scale. Now, the second thing is, in the 19th and 20th century, the development of our art institutions, art schools, art criticisms, and museums, right, have, to a large degree, have been founded upon the idea of artistic mediums and the unique properties or unique affordances of different artistic mediums. So if you're a painter, you explore unique properties or affordances of oil paint or acrylic. And then, let's say in the 90s, when people started to work with software and digital media, we started to explore various properties or affordances of digital media. Think about history of photography. So you go to a place like MoMA, right? We have 5 departments, painting, works on paper, drawings, drawings, books, filming video, and then other, right, where you put everything which doesn't belong. And the same thing, right? You go to every art school around the world, you go to every museum, typically they divide their practice, their education in about 5, 6, 7 categories. So in my book, I'm arguing that one of the most interesting challenges of digital media is that it's really impossible to say how many different mediums we have anymore. But more importantly is that the properties, right, the content of a digital artwork or simply digital artifact is no longer contained inside it because it partly becomes dependent on the software which you use. So since I only was supposed to talk for 7 minutes, my talk just, I was able to fit my talk into my iPhone. So I'll just read a couple of minutes, right? So just to make it precise, accepting the centrality of software puts in question a fundamental concept of aesthetic and media theory, that is the properties of a medium. What does it mean to refer to a digital medium as having properties? For example, is it meaningful to talk about unique properties of digital photographs, or electronic texts, or websites, or digital maps? So my answer is no. Different types of digital content do not have any properties by themselves. What we as users experience as properties of media content come from a software used to create, edit, present, and access this content. So let's go through this example, right? So here I took, a digital photograph of myself. This is in Los Angeles, so that's why it's so bright. Just to remind you, if you really get tired of this rain, just get in the plane. So in the analog era, once a photograph was printed, all the information was fixed. Looking at the photograph at home, an exhibition, or in a book didn't affect this information. Okay? So if I take a photo with a digital camera, right, and when I save it, I have a file, and this file has, right, so a certain number of bits, certain number of pixels. So at first it looks like it's very similar. All the information is fixed inside the file. But unless you're kind of a low-level programmer who deals with assembler, right, you're never going to look at the numbers in the file. You're going to look at the photograph through some of software, okay? And then depending on which software you're going to use to access your digital photograph, its properties, its affordances are going to change. So for example, if I just kind of click right on my photograph, in a Macintosh OS, I get the image, and all I can do is look at this image. Right? If you're using some kind of multimedia messaging in your phone, right, you can maybe, again, display the image and send it to somebody else, but that's about it. Now if I open, if I open the same photograph in the media viewer, I can do more, right? For example, if it's Google Picasso, I can crop, auto color, do red eye reduction, apply a variety of filters, and so on. And finally, if I open the same file in Photoshop, suddenly the same photograph, the same set of bits, have many more affordances, right? I can instruct Photoshop to automatically replace some colors in the photo with others, make visible its linear structure by running edge detection, blur, and so on and so forth. So if I'm allowed, I'm going to make a very dramatic, I think, statement. There is, people talk about digital media, digital art, media art. There is no such thing as digital media, right? Digital media does not exist. The only thing which really exists is software, right? There is only software as applied to media or content. So for users who only interact with media, content for application software, the properties of digital media are defined by particular software as opposed to being solely contained in the actual content. And finally, for just 20 seconds, so the last challenge, which again has to do with scale. So in my lab, we have been creating visualizations of massive image collections, such as this visualization, which shows 1 million manga pages, organized by visual style, and and at the University of California, San Diego, I was fortunate to work with scientists who constructed these giant display walls. So here's a display wall made from 70 13-inch monitors, and we can interactively zoom, pan into this visualization, and also sort it by different properties. Right? But I can't bring this into museum or gallery because it's experimental, experimental research, and the thing will break and it will cost probably $100,000. So so what I do is I create these works, waiting for 5-10 years when technology catches up. So the best exhibition which I had so far was in the Graphic Design Museum in Netherlands, where we simply printed, this huge image, so at least you can see the detail, but you can see it's even larger in the gallery, so you have to go outside to look at this. Right? So one, I think, interesting strategy for digital artists is you create something knowing what technology is going to catch up with you in 5-10 years. I'm done.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, thanks a lot, and I hope we can return to some of these issues because, what you have just outlined goes so deep in terms of an understanding of software that I think it's hard to translate to people who are collecting for the Met, when you're addressing issues at that level.
Wait 40 years.
Yeah. So I want to get started by coming back to some of the issues raised here and start with a more practical issue of what kind of challenges and obstacles you have faced. You already indicated in your presentations in getting your work collected. Just approaching it on a little bit more of an abstract level, what were the main challenges and issues for you as a gallerist and for you as artists, and how have you learned to work with them over time? How have you addressed them over time?
One thing that I should mention is that people are always nervous about collecting this work because they think it's going to break, or it's which it does, or it's going to get outmoded and you're going to have to migrate it. So we give, which is something that I learned from Klaus Oldenburg, we give a 50-year guarantee and a portfolio of everything that we made, all the flow charts, all the material, so that if there's a planet, one can find all these things and remake it. So we have those kinds of very detailed manuals for its preservation and continuance.
Mm-hmm. And just throwing in yet another very banal obstacle to that, I know from experience that museums then often have a problem with where to put that information, because does it become part of the collected work, or does it go into special collections, or does it go, so behind the scenes these are all again issues that become difficult for museum registration departments.
Then they have to change.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, well, that's the natural thing of the institutions, that it is not a flexible beast. You have those incredibly categorized departments and the majority of work, software-based work, has all different outputs, so very often it wouldn't fit this place or that place. I don't think there are any solutions other than hiring younger people that are familiar with technologies. And those things occur, it happens. The Tate Department of Media Art is actually incredibly sophisticated, and they know their things. It's very hard for me to have any formula or prescription because each and every work is different. So, you know, that there cannot be an umbrella how to treat it. We try to adapt for the specifics of every object that is being sold. That said, yes, of course, there is some degree of comfort in the fact that this work is at the moment produced by the living artist, so there's always a go-to person. There is still a gallery that has represented this work in acquisition. So yeah, it's one of the reasons that it's not so easy to sell this to sell media-based works is that all these organizations don't want headaches. You know, it's much easier to deliver a stable object that will sit there and preferably a flat.
Can I just add something?
Object.
But the good news is that most of traditional art you see in museums around the world is already broken. You know, when Vincent van Gogh was using the new medium of oil painting, the colors were changing within like 2 years, and he knew it. So if you know, I was in Amsterdam and I went to Van Gogh Museum and we have an amazing exhibition called Van Gogh at Work. And the more we looking at this painting using microscopes, we realized that the colors changed. And in some cases, you know how they change, in some cases you don't. So lots of this very pretty, you know, Renaissance or Baroque painting you see in museums. The reason it's so pretty, creators said, you know what, the colors faded, but we have all these tourists coming in with their cameras, let's make it really nice and colorful. So most of the works you see in museums are semi-broken anyway, right? It's just people know, we think we know how to fix it, so it's just a matter of time. At least with digital media, you have a code, so you can actually back to the original. With Van Gogh painting, you don't know what the original was.
So the choice, I think, do you deliver the hardware yourself, or do you try to make it go through software? And there have been many phone calls I've gotten to fix works, and it's not a lot of fun. But you do want to keep it running, and for your benefit and the benefit of the institution. And I often advise people who are very concerned to buy the backup laptop to have the parts available. And that's one reason in the beginning everyone was saying you should create your own ROM, you should use your own boards. But I chose to use an Apple computer because I knew they made millions of parts and there would be parts available in the market for a long time. And I can still bid on and buy the 280C Duo docks. They're about $75 on eBay. They come up about every 2 months. So I kind of have a market in parts that has to be kept going. The other side of that, which turned out sometime in the mid-2000s to be interesting, was that there's also a market in the repair. So when we sold many of these, and then we were immediately the specialists in repairing them. So we could charge, you know, what do you pay at Apple Store or TechServe to fix something? So there's a little market in the parts and the repair that you can keep going, although that won't be forever. So the hardware has its downsides. The downsides of the software are that when I wrote it, the original apps in Java, of course, Java was going to be the universal language that everyone would use forever. So now maybe it should be in HTML5, you know? Maybe it should be in something else. So when you start to look at migrating, you write a piece of software and you sell it perpetually to a collector, then you have to worry about that kind of migration. So that's also an issue. And do you want to rewrite it 15 years later? So anyway.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think this is important to, in terms of just summarizing what models have been tried. As John said, is it the software-based model? We're selling software and licensing it to you, and you can, run it on any computer in your home as a collector. So there's a playable system. Or do you sell the object actually as the panels you have created? And if I'm not mistaken, didn't you also give sometimes 2 of them to a collection as a backup? One, or am I mixing you up with someone else?
I advised them to buy the backup parts.
Okay.
As a rule, the markup, the margin in your profit is better on the hardware, but the long-term maintenance is harder.
Yeah. So all kinds of models have been tried on that level. Another one, and I don't know if Magda has any comments on that too, was the big issue which John indicated in the beginning between the small edition that is highly priced or a huge edition at a small price. So do you adopt the model from video art and you create 3 pieces, each for 15,000, or are you selling every icon for $20 in an unlimited edition? And those are both models that have been tried to varying success. What is important to keep in mind here that as in video, ultimately, you're imposing an artificial scarcity that doesn't exist in the first place, and that is also something problematic. And people have actually tried other models too, which are museums pay, other people don't, in terms of more of a cultural responsibility for that type of work.
But not many museums do. How many would you say have media curators and media collections in the world?
Oh, unfortunately, I don't have statistics, but you're right. It's still few. There are more media curators, but media means mostly film video at this point in time. And if you look at the collections, film video aside, of media-based works, it's often really just a handful of works. I don't know if you had...
Well, only to say that according to my idea that media artists are like any other artists, they also should be allowed to make a living like any other artist. So very often this model of small, scarce editions has been created, and we have participated in limited editions of works that that are acquired, and then there is a lot of offshoots, for example, with the video work where there may be lower resolution version of the work exists online and available for everybody. But I mean, there is no model. There really is no model that covers the full ground and is actually successful, because unlike a reproduction of a static work, the time-based work is not even available to be judged or watched unless you watch the whole thing. So you cannot have an idea of that. So the effort to put it out in some form is a very important effort, and it sort of flies in the face of an artist making a similar money as in other creative formats.
So I think it's really about value and establishing some sort of value. I mean, you could sell an idea, and essentially you're selling ideas with these projects.
Yeah. Also, another question for Lev, given what you have outlined in your presentation, which ultimately is highly complex and cuts to the philosophy of software, what are the advantages or disadvantages for collectability for this for the issues you outlined? What makes what opens up possibilities because of these unique characteristics you've outlined, and what is the obstacle? I mean, I'm not even saying that you can divide it that clearly along a line, but if you have some further thoughts on that.
Before I answer that, I just want to say, so I was thinking about photography, right? And photography introduced this idea of like limiting supply, right? So you have this 50 prints or 100 prints, but of course you can make a limited number of prints. It's different from etching and engraving, which is a market pioneered by Rembrandt, because after you make 200 prints in a plate, kind of becomes even. So photography took about 140 years for it to get to into museums. So we just have to see, right? Basically, either the Earth will disappear because of because of certain global issues, all right, or we'll get into museums. So I guess it depends what happens first, right? In 100 years, we'll see. So I think what I was basically trying to say was sort of simple, but maybe reading from iPhone wasn't the best idea. So obviously, if you have interactive work, right, like you're playing video game or some interactive installation, every time work changes, right? Every time you get different experience. So that's kind of obvious. But what I was trying to say is, even if you have something very simple, like a digital image, right? Most people look at images using some software, apps, Photoshop, right? Nobody looks at the file, and depending upon which software you're going to use, right? Every software is going to give you some editing functions or sharing functions. And depending on software you're going to use to open the image, like what this image is, what you can do with it, is going to change, right? So there's this very kind of deep variability in digital software. So I think the challenge, and maybe both advantage for collecting, is that when you collect something, right, you're probably not going to put a computer or Photoshop and say, okay, here, look Photoshop to look at my image, and then your guest comes and gets drunk and start changing the colors, right, and saves the file. You're probably going to put it in some situation where it can be changed, right? So what you're doing is you're kind of fixing this variability and making something which is inherently variable into something fixed. And there's both advantages to that, because you just projected the space of variations into a single unique thing, but at the same time you're losing, I think, what is maybe essential about digital media, which is this variability.
Thank you. It would be great if you have any questions, could come to the microphone and line up. One issue we haven't talked about very much is ultimately preservation, although both Lynn and John have indicated what they commonly do to ease the process. Museums do interviews with artists when the work gets into the collection, so that is also one way of ensuring that you basically have some framework for addressing the work's malfunctioning in the future. So, first question.
Thank you all for sharing your experience and expertise, and it's especially encouraging in a sense, although also discouraging to hear that it might take 40, 50, 60 years for the work that we're making to, find its place in collections and things like that.
Less for you.
Less for us. I agree. You've paved the way. So a question I have is, recently there was an iPad app called Planetary, and it was created by Bloom, and it was kind of a visualization of your music library in the form of a solar system. And that was released a few years ago, and then very recently they open sourced their code, and it was acquired by an organization, I don't remember the name right now, that is dedicating themselves to preserving the algorithms that underlie that piece of software art, and saying, as the different technologies that we use to write software change, we're going to continue to propagate the underlying algorithms, because that's where really the concept and the beauty of this piece is. Do you see a growing place for that kind of an organization that in and of itself is not a museum or cultural institution in that sense, but is part of the ecosystem of supporting and preserving digital work so that it can be expressed in future technologies?
Well, I guess the short answer is absolutely, because one of the questions that many people working in this field have also raised is whether museums are indeed the best institutions of taking care of many of the aspects of that work. And I think the answer is no, perhaps they are not, and we need more organizations like that who actually preserve algorithms behind work. This would be a great job for Silicon Valley to do, to actually run these organizations. Unfortunately, their whole model is also based on obsolescence of software. So somehow intuitively that doesn't really chime. I want to get a couple more questions through. So,
I'm an archivist, so for me, these discussions about the collectibility of these digital objects that you're creating is just utterly fascinating. But talking about how you're waiting for museums to catch up, thinking about 40 years, and Lynn's earlier comment about how a lot of this media art is impossible to preserve and archive in a lot of senses. I'm curious about you as the artists, as the ones who are creating the material. What have been your efforts towards preserving it on your own until you have to wait those 40 years for the technology to catch up?
Before I hand it over to the artist, just a quick note. I didn't want to create that impression that the museums are catching up. There are the initiatives I briefly showed in the beginning, such as the Variable Media Network and others. They started way before museums actually adopted their models, and those were artists and curators and archivists. So,
yeah, I understand completely. I just know that as an archivist in the field myself, working with a lot of cultural heritage institutions, I mean, that seems to be the impression that we get, and it's very frustrating that you're waiting for museums to take that effort, and sometimes it's like glacial. It's a glacial effort.
I don't think that's ever been true, actually. No. I think artists have been the pioneers in creating.
I agree with you about the artists. I'm talking about the people who collect the work on behalf of museums and the way that they're able to best service that material. So I guess, I know this is a separate discussion, but I'm just kind of curious to know what the artists do in the meantime. What do you do in the meantime?
You don't throw away your records.
No, definitely.
But I find that there's kind of a meta level when work gets into particular museums, like this collaboration between the Tate Modern and San Francisco, where they're actually just now trying to figure out how to preserve these things without killing them. So, and they have archived more than I had ever thought possible some of these works and created, the questions and answers for the history and future of them.
We have one more minute, so why don't you just throw out the question and perhaps we can answer it, privately later, just to keep the question in the air.
Hi, I'm Neil Stimbler from the Met Digital Media. What is the role of artists and gallerists in being good digital stewards of these works when they come into public collections, especially around standards and open licensing?
Buy lots of backups.
Yeah.
So where's your responsibility in that, though, as an artist?
Well, I do own them. I still have working floppy drives, and I just repaired a piece from '99 that was run for 9 years continually. So I have I just feel like this collector buys almost one of every edition that comes out, and I want to keep that collector buying, so I keep the works running, so I keep the equipment and the software around.
So just in wrapping up, I think the responsibility has been assumed mostly by the artists, by the curators who have founded these networks, who have been creating the initiatives. And I know, without mentioning any names, that it very often has been the artists coming to the museum saying, listen, my online piece is not working, would you like me to fix it? And not the museum approaching the artist about it. Thank you very much. So we've run out of time and have to wrap it up here with a keynote. Thank you.